Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to our end of the year new law briefing. Lots going on right now, and we have a full agenda, so we're going to dive right in. Just a few housekeeping items as we get started. We are recording, so just wanted to note that for folks that prefer to be off camera. And we will share the recording and the slides after this event with all of the registrants. So you can just try to soak it up today. No need to take notes or screenshots unless you prefer to do that. So we'll get that out to everybody shortly after the event. And before we hand it off to our panel, who will speak for most of the event today, I wanted to just quickly go over some reminders about what Forefront does in this state for those that are less familiar, because we know often attendees at policy events aren't as familiar with Forefront. So here's a snapshot of our agenda. And then quickly, I want to just go over what Forefront does. So here's our team. Forefront is people that are here to serve the nonprofit sector in our state. Forefront is the state's nonprofit association. And so we provide an array of services that are tied both to membership and to our mission. So some benefits are reserved for members, but some are open to the public, like today's briefing. So I want to just quickly remind folks some of our member benefits and invite you all to our next membership orientation if you'd like to learn more. So members, for example, can submit job postings. So if you have a job opening at your organization, you can submit it to our job board anytime, and there's a way to do that online. And then the general public can see those jobs that are available within the nonprofit sector. We also offer peer networks. So those include things like a nonprofit leadership consortium, CEO roundtables, trust-based philanthropy, peer network, and so on. And we have a variety of those that members can join and then regularly engage with like-minded peers. We also have a peer skill share. So that's where members can trade notes kind of on a one-off basis from a fellow expert. So that might include questions about fundraising or event planning or budgeting, governance, board development, strategic planning, program evaluation, and so on. And then also we offer Forefront employs full-time librarians. And so because we have actual librarians, they can provide services to members that would otherwise not be available to the general public. And our library isn't just like a pile of dusty old books. Most of it's digitized, and then those resources can be shared with members. And that includes access to databases that can help you do donor prospect research or foundation research to help you with your fundraising, also salary, benefit reports, things like that. So if you're interested in that, you can make an appointment with our librarians and send them essentially any request, and they'll help triage that as needed. We also offer the ICAT, which is a capacity assessment that members can take with support from our senior program director. And that occurs over a series of in-depth meetings. It's a really valuable process. And then our Converge program is a fee-for-service program that offers back-end office support for kind of the boring administrative stuff that nonprofits need to do to run their businesses. So that includes accounting, 990 preparation, bookkeeping, and so on. So we have an array of those services for members, and I'll post some of those links in chat when I'm done here. Beyond that, we have a lot of things that are available to all stakeholders. So that includes, for example, our Racial Equity Collective program. And that's managed by my peer, Sharmeen Shahjahan, who's the director over the REC. And the REC actually has a map of work that folks are doing around the state. And if you're trying to advance racial equity within your own organization or in your community, there's a way to submit data to this map so that others can find you and learn from you. And then conversely, you can also find other folks that might be working in a space that you're trying to learn more about. So I'd encourage you to check this out. And just this month, the REC launched the application process for the next cohort, which will be a group of leaders around the state that are meeting regularly to learn from each other and help align their work and advance racial equity in our state. So there's lots of opportunities in that program to help move our state in the right direction. And then I'm about to wrap up here. A few more things. Want to make sure folks are signed up for our biweekly newsletter. That's where you're going to get all the information about events like this, about other programs that I just mentioned, and about public policy at the federal, state, and local level. I want to spend a minute talking a little bit specifically about the policy program as we segue to our panel. So first and foremost, make sure you're signed up for our Action Center in addition to the biweekly newsletter. That's where you're going to get the breaking news on policy. So when we need folks to contact legislators or submit comments for rules at the federal or state level, or sometimes things that happen in between our biweekly newsletter that are kind of urgent. So that's really a good place for policy wonks, which is probably a lot of you, to make sure you're engaged and following along with our work. So in our policy program, we partner with folks at the federal and state level and really rely on those partnerships, particularly at the federal level, where we work closely with United Philanthropy Forum, the Council on Foundations, Independent Sector, and National Council of Nonprofits. So our federal agenda is derived primarily through our partnerships with them. And because Forefront's the States Nonprofit Association, we have counterparts in other states, and those counterpart organizations have policy teams. So I work closely with my policy counterparts in other states when we're on the Hill and lobbying on behalf of the nonprofit sector in Washington, D.C. And we have a page on our website dedicated to our federal work, and you can follow along there. And then, of course, at the state level, we have strong partnerships with the Health and Human Services Coalition and other organizations listed here, all of whom have representation on our policy committee, which helps advise our work. So we work closely with a lot of the other statewide organizations that help support specific parts of the nonprofit sector. And we're working together on a lot of issues that I'm going to touch on at the very end of the program to make sure folks know where we're headed in 2025. So with that, I'll pause. And as I mentioned, when I'm done speaking, I'll pop some links in chat that provide more information about a few of the things I touched on here. But first, I'd like to quickly introduce our panel. And it's a great panel. I'm really grateful that they're all here today. Thank you so much. I know events in December aren't everyone's favorite. Everyone's trying to wind down, or in some cases wind up because the end of the year is so busy. So thank you for taking the time to be here. So I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order, and then we'll hand it off first to our friends from Department of Labor. So Lori Beeler has been a part of GATA since its inception. She was a member of this Illinois Single Audit Commission that drafted GATA legislation. In addition, she led several GATA subcommittees and work groups developing GATA rules for the state of Illinois and designing associated frameworks. Thanks for being here, Lori. Joshua Gibb is president and CEO of Galesburg Community Foundation and the current president of the statewide Alliance of Illinois Community Foundations. Josh has a BA in political science from Western Illinois University and is also the treasurer of the Knox County Area Partnership for Economic Development. Josh is also a beekeeper, worth mentioning, very unique. But not necessarily why you're here today, but thanks, Josh. Courtney Jackson is the GATU manager for the Grant Accountability and Transparency Unit. So she works with Lori. That's within the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Courtney has been a member of the GATU team for 5 years, serving as the subject matter expert for indirect costs specifically. Next, we have Anna Keppel who is the Legislative and Policy Director at the Illinois Department of Labor in Springfield, Illinois. And she serves also as the department's rules coordinator. She has served in these roles since 2020. Prior to working at the Department of Labor, Anna was a researcher and lobbyist for a construction labor union. She lives in Springfield and is originally from Jacksonville, Illinois. She graduated from the University of Missouri. Thanks for being here, Anna. Norma Celadon is the Director of Leadership Development for Equality Illinois. Her work issues include gender equity, leadership development, gender violence, cultural competence, and racial equity. She has been an ED administrator for CPS, a nonprofit board member. She holds degrees from Loyola University, Northeastern University, and a PhD from National Louis University. And last but not least, Amy Sneerson manages the Illinois Department of Labor's Equal Pay Unit. Prior to that, she served as the executive director of the Maine Human Rights Commission. So she's new to Illinois, welcome again, and practiced law with a focus on employment, education, and civil rights issues in a private firm, nonprofit agency, and state attorney general settings in Maine and Missouri. She received her undergraduate degree from the University of Rochester, New York, and her law degree from the School of Social Law, from the School of Law at Washington University in St. Louis. So as you can see, we're in good hands today. We appreciate so much this very expert panel being here. And I'm going to pass it off to our IDOL team, and they're going to cover a couple issues for you and then hand it off back to me for one, and then to Equality Illinois for the next. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the warm introduction. So, as Holly said, my name is Amy Sneerson. I am new to Illinois and to the department, and the Equal Pay Act is what I do here. So there are changes to the Illinois Equal Pay Act going into effect in January 2025 that will affect all of you as employers and those of you who host job boards like the one that Holly mentioned. Forefront has a job board. The Illinois Equal Pay Act is intended to address pay disparities, but over time it has sought to do that in different ways. The Equal Pay Act itself applies to more or less all employers in Illinois, but there are specific provisions like the ones going into effect in January that apply to a smaller subset. This applies, it's called pay transparency, and it applies to employers that have 15 or more employees. And what it says is no employer is required to make any job posting, but if an employer chooses to make a job posting for a specific position, that either will be performed in Illinois, at least in part, or performed outside of Illinois, but supervised somehow in Illinois, then the posting itself has to include the wage or salary or a wage or salary range and a general description of benefits for the posted position. And the reason that I mentioned job boards is that there's a specific provision in the Equal Pay Act, the Illinois Equal Pay Act, that says third parties that are engaged to post a job posting on behalf of an employer are required to also make sure that pay and benefits are included. And if the employer has provided pay and benefit information and the third party makes the posting without the pay and benefit information, the third party can itself be liable under the Illinois Equal Pay Act. So just wanted to flag that for you all. There is a sort of a subpart, next slide please, to the pay transparency requirement, which says it's related to job postings. And the intent is of these amendments is to make not only pay and benefits more transparent to job seekers, but also opportunities that might otherwise be not as easy to find, which if an employer makes an external job posting, external meaning outside of their current employees, the employer is required to notify their current employees, all of them, of all opportunities for promotion within 14 calendar days. So pay transparency gets a lot of airtime, but hidden within it is promotional opportunity. The department will be enforcing this, and our intent is to be focused on compliance, on helping employers get used to this new requirement, which only exists and is being enforced more or less in one state other than Illinois. If an employer makes a posting and it does not contain pay or benefit information, and the department concludes that that's the case, if the posting is still active at the time we make that determination, the statute provides that we will work with the employer. They'll have an opportunity to cure the violation before they'll be subjected to any penalties, which doesn't exist in the Colorado framework. I also just want to mention that employers, there's an update to the existing requirement that employers maintain all records. That already is in the statute for the Equal Pay Act, that they keep records for 5 years related to employment. But the update says employers are required to make and preserve records that document the wages paid to each employee, pay scale and benefits for each position, and the job postings. So those records that we're encouraging employers to hang on to will be helpful if there is a complaint filed. That's generally the way that the department enforces laws like this, is by complaints that we receive. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anna.
Thanks, Amy. Next slide, please. So again, my name is Anna Keppel. I'm the Legislative and Policy Director at the Department of Labor. We were asked to talk about the overtime rules. So just some lay of the land here. The federal government, USDOL, establishes standards for which employees need to be paid time and a half if they work more than 40 hours in a week, and which employees are exempt from that requirement. They can, work more than 40 hours a week and don't have to be paid time and a half for it. Often we call those salaried employees, but that's not exactly right always, but essentially that's what we're thinking about. So earlier this year, there's been a bit of a back and forth on the federal level. So earlier this year, the Biden administration proposed an expansion of the category of workers entitled to overtime, time and a half, if they work more than 40 hours in a week. And something to remember and consult with your attorneys on is the fact that the law requires that employers look at not just how much money is the worker making. There's a salary test that they have to exceed in order to not be paid overtime, as well as a duties test. What is the work that they are doing? Are they acting as an executive, administrative, or professional employee? And there are specific factors to determine whether any given employee is exempt. So the Biden administration proposed this increase in the salary test, meaning that if someone was making $40,000 a year as a manager before, they did not have to be paid overtime because they made more than the salary threshold. But then the new salary threshold was higher than that. So all of a sudden, someone at that level might have to start getting paid overtime. There was a lawsuit to challenge this, and in November, a federal judge did vacate the rule. So there was an increase in July. There was scheduled to be an increase this coming January, and they had also proposed that salary test increase indexed to some labor market data. So that is all not in effect because of the federal judge's actions. I think it's fair to consider whether the incoming presidential administration will continue fighting for this rule or just walk away from it. So the bottom line is it's a return to the status quo prior to July of this year. The salary test is at the same level it has been for the last couple of years. I thought I had a link on this slide or information on this slide about where to find the page on our website that actually lists what that salary level is and what those duties tests are for executive, administrative, and professional. I'm not sure where that went, but I can put it in the chat and maybe Holly can send it around afterwards.
Thanks, Anna. It's on a wrap-up slide, so
Okay,
it'll be
good.
in the presentation.
So I just put it in the chat as well. So if you've got employees whose salary is kind of hovering around that $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year salary band, I'll say, I'm going to take a look at this, consult your attorneys, and make sure that you're paying people overtime if they're entitled to it. Next slide. Oh, and I also will say, I'm so sorry, there seems to be an ambulance going by. So this is a federal rule, but it's important to note that the Illinois minimum wage law on the state level pretty much tracks this. So even though our investigation and enforcement of minimum wage and overtime violations stands apart from federal government investigation and enforcement of the federal minimum wage and overtime law, in Illinois, we do kind of track that salary test to whatever the feds have. Okay, next slide, please. So right now, we're going to pause for questions for me and Amy on equal pay and overtime, because Amy and I do need to get to another meeting. And then Holly is going to talk about the Worker Freedom of Speech Act, which is a new law taking effect January 1st, but my office is currently in litigation on this new law, so we're not able to talk about it on advice of our attorneys. So right now, does anybody have questions about the Equal Pay Act or minimum wage overtime? And I don't know, would that come through the chat or?
I'm not
Um,
seeing any questions in chat, but folks are welcome to raise their hand or speak up verbally. We do have time for questions on our agenda right now for IDOL specifically, if anyone has any.
Then I'm also gonna put our emails in there. Amy, what's your DOL.equalpay at illinois.gov?
Yep, I'm actually typing it in there right now.
I'll go, you do that, you do that. I'll put me, you put you.
And we do have someone raising their hand. Trish, go ahead.
Hey, Holly, everyone else, thanks so much for everything today. For the promotion opportunities, posting requirements, is that for employers with 15 plus employees, or is that for everyone?
That is both of the requirements. Pay transparency and promotional opportunity only apply to employers with 15 or more employees. And if it's for positions that are being conducted, the work will physically be done in Illinois, at least in part, or out of state, but supervised by an Illinois supervisor or officer worksite.
Okay, thank you.
And say, if folks want more, like much more detailed information about those provisions, Amy and I do like hour-long webinars that are just about equal pay every month. You can sign up for those on our website. I think the next one is,
December 17th.
oh, it's coming right up. So,
And you can go on our website on the link that I included, and you don't need to register. You just go that day and hit the link. And all the questions that people are posting about the pay transparency and promotional opportunities, those are all questions we get all the time, and we can talk about them at the webinar, but also there are resources on our dedicated website, the slides that we've used before, FAQs that answer a lot of these, like how much benefit information, things like that. They're all great questions.
yeah, there's literally 32 frequently asked questions just on pay transparency and promotional opportunities. Jennifer asks, so to confirm, the FLSA law for overtime is no longer in effect, correct? So no, like overtime is still required for employees over a certain salary threshold and who have certain duties. Like overtime has not gone away. The Biden administration had proposed increasing the number of workers who are entitled to overtime, and that increase is no longer in effect, but we are back to status quo where workers who make more than $684 a week are, let me double check that. It's gone around and around. Yes, an employee who makes less than $684 per week is entitled to overtime.
Any other questions for IDOL? Feel free to reach out. They've provided their email address for questions related to equal pay. And then maybe we can specifically link folks to the FAQ you mentioned, just to help with efficiency there. And then we'll provide this information to with follow-up to this event.
So there's a couple questions about full-time and part-time in here. And I will say that generally labor law in Illinois doesn't distinguish between workers who are part-time or full-time. All workers are entitled to labor protections.
And it's
Maybe
true
have a
that
question about
the Pay
over-
Act does not carve out anything about full-time or part-time.
Right. Maybe that full-time, what if your full-time is 30 hours a week question is about overtime? Would you be legally required to pay overtime like at the 31st hour if your full-time is typically 30? The law only says after 40 hours overtime is required. You may have a collective bargaining agreement that says different. You may have, an internal policy that says different. So there may be other requirements you're required to follow. But what the Illinois minimum wage law says is after 40.
Amy's shared the FAQ in chat, so just wanted to flag that for folks that want to grab it. Any final questions? Or comments from our colleagues at IDOL?
Just want to say, keep doing the good work that you're doing. Feel free to send questions to us by email, and thanks for including us. Sorry we have to jump out.
It's okay. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much. And if folks have additional questions, I'll touch base with you after this event. So appreciate
Great.
you. I'm, as mentioned, going to quickly
everybody.
cover a new law that we're not sure folks are aware of. And those that are have touched base with me to offer questions and concerns. So we wanted to kind of help get the word out about this. And then if you need more information or have questions or concerns, you can send those to me anytime. So this year, a bill passed that is noted here, and the references here for folks that want to read the bill itself, and I'll also share that in chat. And what the bill does is say that employers can't punish employees for not attending a meeting where the employer discusses the employer's view on policy or religion. And so it doesn't ban employers from hosting those kinds of meetings, but it does prevent employers from, penalizing an employee that opts out of a meeting like that. There's no exception provided to 501c3s. There is an exception provided for C4s since, and fives and sixes, since the nature of their existence often centers around advocacy work and policy work. And so because of the fact that C3s aren't exempt from this law, there's some gray areas that we've kind of identified and some questions that folks have raised about a C3 that does operate in the policy space or have employees that potentially work on public policy on behalf of the employer, or so we're trying to learn more about the implications for this law. And as our colleagues from IDOL mentioned, there is pending litigation. And so this may change in the future, or there may be trailer legislation that helps clarify some of the questions around it. But we do want to flag this as something that folks should take a look at. And in a practical sense, one thing that can be done is if you do engage or expect employees to engage in policy, that including a specific statement to that effect in their job descriptions can offer some protection. So that's just a practical tip in the short term while we unpack what this means. Questions? And I will link the law itself in chat for you. And if this is one you hadn't looked at yet, we just encourage you to do so, and then reach out if you have any follow-up questions or concerns. Amanda, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you can clarify what they mean by policy in this situation. Are they talking about like internal policy or external, like legal policy type of thing?
External.
External, sorry.
Yeah. Good question. Sorry, that wasn't clear. Any other questions on this one? If an employee failed to attend a meeting where policy was discussed but didn't cite policy as a rationale for not attending the meeting, are we still barred from punishing them? That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. I appreciate the question. And we'll make a note. You're welcome, Kara. Any other questions? Amanda, your hand's up. Is that from the last time, or okay?
Yep, sorry.
No worries. I know how that goes. Okay. I don't see any more questions. Feel free to raise them as we continue on. Then there might be time at the end if something comes to mind. So at this time, I'm going to hand it off to our friend Norma, and Norma is going to cover, oh, sorry, let me just pause before I do that and just note these links. So this will be in your slide deck when you receive it. It's the key information for the information that was covered by IDOL. So Norma is from Equality Illinois, and Norma's going to talk about the bill they promulgated to that impacts grant makers in our state. And some of you are already aware of this, and more information is to come, but Norma's going to go over all of that. So Norma, take it away.
Good morning, buenos dias to everyone. Holly, thank you so much for inviting Equality Illinois to share information with all of your constituents, your audience. So before we dive in, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background. So the bill was co-written by Equality Illinois, but was actually introduced in the House by Representative Edgar Gonzalez and at the Senate by Senator Adrian Johnson. And it was number 3 of 3 related bills. And the impulse to introduce the bill came from the concern about the inequity of funding provided to the LGBTQ led and serving organizations. But because according to the Equality Giving Lab, organizations receive only 0.16 of charitable giving nationwide, so not even 1%. So that was sort of what impulsed the writing of this or introducing of this bill. So what are we talking about? Technically, it's the Public Act 103-0635, which is also known as the Nonprofit Board Diversity Reporting Act. And of course, foundations fall under the nonprofit category. And so what does it do? It requires that any nonprofit that provides $1 million or more in grants each year have to publish aggregated diversity data about their board of directors. Next slide, please, Holly. So what does reporting require? I think that we might be ahead one slide. Thank you, Holly. So what does that mean? So people have been seeing the January 1st date, and so you do not have to report as of January 1st. As of January 1st, the act goes into effect. And so that what that means is that this aggregated data must be published on the nonprofit's website no later than 30 days after the filing of the organization's 990s. So whenever that is, 30 days after that. So that I think that a lot of people were starting to panic because of that date. The key thing here is that that data has to remain on the website for 3 years. So when you collect this data again, so the data that is collected in 2025 has to remain until 2028. When you collect data in 2026, that has to remain until 2029. So whatever data you collect in that year has to remain on the site for 3 years. What is important here that some folks are concerned about is that privacy is protected. Because it is aggregated, there should be no data that is linked to any particular director. And so they have the option also to opt out from disclosing any part of that demographic information that is requested of them. So next slide, please, Holly. So what is the required data that is asked for within the actual act? What is made mention of is race, ethnicity, gender, disability status, veteran status, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Gender identity. The act is managed by the Illinois Department of Human Rights, and organizations like Forefront and Equality Illinois are working with IDHR to look at the other subcategories. So for now, we ask you to stay tuned, and IDHR has promised that we will have information ready before the beginning of the year. The law also requires input from stakeholders like Forefront and Equality Illinois in order to move forward. We do want to share that that information site is in development, so please stay tuned for those updates. We wanted to give you also an idea of those major categories, which fall under, again, race, ethnicity, gender identity, transgender identity, sexual orientation, and I'm sorry, I can't read that. I think it says
Disability status.
Disability status. Thank you so much, Holly. And again, those subcategories are yet not finalized at this time. Okay, so I want to return to again why this is important, and just make emphasis on the fact that marginalized populations benefit a great deal when foundation boards embrace diversity, and diverse boards foster more inclusive and equitable approaches to philanthropy. And I leave you with a quote that says collective demographic data is essential for evaluating the impact of philanthropic efforts and ensuring that they effectively promote equity. I have included links that refer to data and statistics, and so I understand that this deck will be made available to you, so those links will be available for you to dig deeper if you want. So what does this mean for you? What should the next steps be? First and foremost, we want you to consider both Forefront and Equality Illinois as resources. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback, please contact us. And in a moment, I will also leave my email as well as our website in case you have any questions. You should start to plan to begin to collecting data if you haven't done so already. You should inform your board members, particularly about the fact that they can opt out and nothing will be linked to individuals. And then just keep a lookout for updates from both Forefront and Equality Illinois. We worked together, and so any information that you receive from either of us will be mirrored to each other. As soon as information is finalized, we will make sure to share that information with you. And I think I saw some questions popping up.
Yes, I'm trying to tackle them. There was a question about whether there's a size threshold for the board, and so I explained there's not one in the law. We did request that, but that was not accepted during our negotiations. So there's no board threshold size in the law. Secondly, someone asked about 708 community mental health boards and if it applies. So the law applies specifically to corporations as they're defined under the General Not-for-Profit Corporation Act in the state law. So you should reference that, and that each organization can determine whether that applies to them. Does this law apply to nonprofit organizations that serve as a fiscal agent or subcontract? My understanding, and Norma, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that monies that are passed through as subgrants would be counted against the $1 million threshold. So the answer to Ann's question would be yes.
Yes, that is correct.
And then finally, does this apply to nonprofits that provide pass-through? So yes. Same. Norma, do you want to add anything on any of these points?
I don't have any additions. I do want to again emphasize that this is something that benefits all communities. So it's not only about the LGBTQ community, but any community that is considered marginalized would benefit from that data collection.
And I want to say thanks again, because Equality Illinois did incorporate quite a bit of our feedback in this final like the way it was finally passed. So thank you for that and for partnering with us on that. And we'll continue to work with you as folks implement this, and everyone can count on more information as the law is fully implemented, because there's still some work to do yet. And in the meantime, if you have questions, you can reach out to me or Norma anytime. And Norma has provided her email address in chat, so thank you, appreciate that. So take note of that, and let us know what questions you have. So
so there's a couple of questions
yes,
in there,
go
Holly.
ahead.
So I'll let you go ahead.
Oh, you can if you're prepared, because I was speaking. If you would like to go first, that's fine.
So as a smaller nonprofit, if you do not distribute $1 million in grants, then this is not something that is applicable to you. Although collecting demographic data is an amazing thing, and to be able to know that your board and staff are diverse is something that we encourage. Is this regulation starting in 2025 or will pass-through grants administered in 2024 necessitate this reporting? And so the answer is yes. And so even though this is starting in 2025, if you provided over $1 million in grants in the prior year, that you should be reporting this information.
I'll make a point to capture the questions in this chat too, and then we can start working on an FAQ that might help folks. And a template for collecting data. Yeah, that we can definitely help with that. I think also what I'll do with follow-up is provide some resources that are offered by Candid. So those, most of you are probably familiar with Candid. It used to be GuideStar. And Candid has a program trying to support organizations that are self-reporting this data voluntarily, because kind of related to the question above from Molly, in some cases it's or often an advantage for a lot of reasons, but it's an advantage to do this even if the law doesn't require you to, because as Molly points out, some funders are looking at this information, and there's, you know, a lot of data to support the idea that more diverse boards improve performance and so on. So there's a lot of reasons why it's worth considering, even if the law doesn't require it. But we understand folks are going to have questions about this and privacy concerns, and so we're happy to help think through some of those things. But Forefront can certainly provide some technical assistance on this, and I know Equality Illinois intends to do the same, and so we'll continue to help folks. There's one more question. If you do not have a website, I'm fairly certain actually the law would exempt folks that don't have a website. Let me verify that.
Yeah, I will verify that, but I want to say that in discussions about this, anything that is public facing, so this is about transparency. And so anything that you do to report your data, whether that might be an annual report, or if you report some of that data on social media, I would encourage to do that. But that's a good point to clarify. So thank you, Laura, for asking that question.
The law reads, if you exceed the $1 million threshold, organization shall post on its publicly available website if one exists, and then continues. So there is an exception if you don't have a website. I wanted to clarify too, going back to a prior slide, we mentioned this is the third of 3 bills that are related. So the other 2 were promulgated in prior years, and one provided a similar requirement to corporate entities in the private sector that have boards of directors. And that data is reported in aggregate by the University of Illinois as of a few years ago for our state. And then also the second one required the state to do the same thing and collect similar data for the state's own boards and commissions. So this now is tackling the same, the spirit of law for the nonprofit sector. So the state's kind of broadly moved in this direction, requiring these kinds of disclosures. And one of the things Forefront's going to work on is helping advise IDHR about how to align all of those data with each other, and also with what the US Census Bureau is going to require in 2030, so that the data is more useful and hopefully reduces the administrative burden for everybody. When we know some folks are reporting this, as has been pointed out, to private funders and sometimes to Candid already. So we're trying to align all those things up now. I'm going to have to move us along because we have other things to cover. I see another question in chat. We'll pull these questions and try to put together an FAQ and then share it with folks. It may take a few days for us to do that, so just be patient with us. You may not get it with the first round of follow-up to this meeting, but we'll definitely be sending more information. Okay, all right. So at this time, we're going to transition away from the new requirements and focus on new opportunities in the new year that are available for the nonprofit sector in our state. So that includes two main areas. One is changes to charitable tax laws that provide an opportunity for our sector. And then secondly, an update from the state budget office on changes to federal and state grant making and how grants are administered under GATA and related to changes in the federal uniform guidance. And then at that time, we'll take questions and do some wrap up. So I'm going to hand it off to first my friend Josh from Galesburg. And Josh is going to cover how nonprofits and donors can benefit from the Illinois Gives Act. But first, I wanted to give you the snapshot of these two changes to charitable tax laws. So in May, the state passed the fiscal year 25 budget. And as a part of that budget package, there's a revenue bill. And both of these proposals were included in that revenue package. So prior to that, they were introduced as a standalone bill in each case, and those bill numbers are noted here. And then all of those provisions were lifted and copied into the revenue package that the state passed with the budget. So first, the Illinois Gives tax credit is effective as of January 1st of 2025, so coming right up. And that is the first time the state's had a charitable tax credit. So it's really a great opportunity. There's a 25% tax credit for donors that make a gift to a permanent endowment at a qualified community foundation. That excludes donor advised funds, but it does include a lot of different types of funds that can directly benefit nonprofits and the people they serve. So that's what Josh is going to talk a little bit about. So it's a really great opportunity, but requires some preparation, both on part of donors and on nonprofits and on community foundations to get ready for this law so we can hit the ground running and make sure we fully leverage it and show that there's a demand for this kind of charitable giving and grant making in our state. And then secondly, this one has a longer effective date, so it's not effective until January 1st of 2026. But that's a good thing because it gives us time to plan. But what it does broadly is decouple state income tax from charitable loan repayment. So if a community foundation uses a scholarship fund or a post-graduation scholarship fund to repay the debt of a worker that's needed in their community, that worker will no longer be taxed on that debt repayment as income. So there's no cost to the general fund because this activity is not currently happening right now because of the tax burden that would be experienced by workers. So it's an exciting opportunity, a private sector solution that we can use to support both debt repayment and workforce development in our communities. So Josh is going to talk a little bit about how folks can prepare and leverage these opportunities. And then we're happy to answer questions. Go ahead, Josh.
Holly, thanks. Well, first and foremost, let me just kind of go back a little bit about those two bills. And I think it's really important in these types of things to discuss the really broad bipartisan nature that we had when those bills were being both introduced in House and Senate. A lot of sponsorship, a lot of interest in being able to do this, and a lot of efforts to make sure that there was geographic diversity in terms of the way in which the rules were made, the policy was drafted. And Holly had brought up that donor advised funds were excluded. We believe that's the first in the nation. We're the first state in the nation to actually do that. And that was part of what we wanted to make sure that the intent of this legislation was. The Alliance of Illinois Community Foundations has been working on this concept for nearly decades, certainly more than a decade. And we're really mirroring the basis of this off of neighboring states. And we were seeing how endowment was growing in neighboring states, and we wanted to give the same opportunity to residents of Illinois. So you can see on this slide, it talks a little bit more about the specifics because this is a credit for individuals. It's not a deduction, it's a credit. And so the community foundation structure is being utilized because community foundations have the ability to build endowment for any nonprofit in the state. The grants from those nonprofits, though, do have to be Illinois-based nonprofits. So we're not allowed to build an endowment for, you know, something in Oregon or wherever it might be. It has to be in the state of Illinois. But there is, because of the a couple of things. One, the geographic diversity and making sure that no one community foundation utilizes all of the credits. And because there is also a requirement that a percentage of all gifts have to be small. There's a couple of different ways to kind of go about getting the credit, but all taxpayers actually have to register. I think a theme is that, hey, this was passed and now we're sort of figuring it out. So just in thinking about how we're collecting the demographic data, DOR is also figuring out how are we going to both qualify the community foundations, the process for that, and get good information to taxpayers so they can do what needs to be done so they can get the proper deduction. But, you know, really for individuals who are connected to your nonprofit organization or to a nonprofit organization, my best advice to you is to reach out to the local community foundation that serves your region, and discuss with them how your donors, how the people who care about your organizations can utilize that structure to take the full benefit of this tax credit. Holly, I think next slide.
Yeah, and I wanted to note before the screenshot here is on mytaxillinois.gov, which is IDOR's website, where donors would create their profile that will allow them to apply for this credit. That process if you don't already have a profile, that process can take 10 days. And so folks that are interested might want to get on top of that early. And so you go to that website, and then under the area for individuals, you'll click on request a letter ID and submit just like your tax ID number, your social security. It's a simple process. And then they're going to mail you a letter that provides you the login information you need in order to move forward. So just an important tactical step to take while we're sorting out other details.
You know, this slide's really, again, for the operating nonprofit, the organizations who have the ability to get endowment built for themselves. Again, community foundations have the structure. Many nonprofits already have funds, permanent endowment funds set up at community foundations, and those funds are eligible to receive the gifts that would be able to give the benefits to your donors. We tried to keep all of that in place. So really the only fund at a community foundation that is not eligible to receive the benefit of this credit is the donor advised fund. So it needs to be a scholarship fund for an Illinois-based school. It needs to be a designated fund, or, you know, you might think of it as an agency fund for your nonprofit organization. Your operating endowments, all of those funds, field of interest funds that are, you know, used for grant making within a community by a community foundation, all of those are eligible. But again, we're learning at the same time that donors across the state are learning, the same time nonprofits across the state are learning. So the best advice that I can really offer is reach out to the community foundation that serves your region. The Alliance of Illinois Community Foundations was fortunate to, you know, be able to now be working with a group that's helping us develop marketing materials. So DOR wants to make sure that people are well educated. We want everybody to be able to have the same sort of experience. And so we're, like Holly had said, like working through like, okay, well, how do taxpayers register? On Tuesday, I registered myself just so I could start to see the slides. So then, you know, we can then begin to really articulate and properly educate everybody. So again, we are flying a plane and learning and building it at the same time. So I just saw this question from Sandra. It has to be a permanently endowed fund, Sandra. So if there's a fiscal agency relationship that you have and that fiscal agent also holds a permanent endowment for you, that could be eligible. But if it's a pass-through fund, that is not eligible. It's only endowed funds. That's a good question. There are going to be ways, I think that corporations are going to be able to use this. Some of the limitations to it are really based on the taxpayer. And there are limits, so it's not an unlimited supply. It's a $5 million credit for the state of Illinois. And it's a 5-year sunset on the opportunity. And so as we begin to implement, we want to be able to collect it working for like what it's actually building endowment for. So we can report back to the legislature, this is the effect of the policy that they put into place. So Sharon, if the nonprofit gift, like to the annual fund, is what you're really referencing, this would not have any effect on what they're doing. This would be for anybody who's wanting to help build permanent endowment for the nonprofit organization. So it has no effect on the annual support that a not-for-profit organization would be getting.
And I just want to emphasize a couple things. One, we know this program provides an opportunity, but doesn't solve every challenge in the nonprofit sector. We understand it's a relatively small program in the scheme of things. But what it does is provide a way to drive money into the sector that will be there permanently. And so that's the intent, is even if the program sunsets after 5 years, which of course we hope it wouldn't, but even if it did, we would have driven money into these endowments that will continue to fund grant making in our communities forever. And that those types of endowed funds can provide a source of capital and general operating money to nonprofits that is otherwise very difficult to get from other sources. And so while it's not an unlimited program that supports charitable giving to all C3s in our state, because that would be untenable in terms of scale, because the state has, over 50,000 C3s, and it would just be an unmanageable program, both in terms of cost and administration at the state level. So we're working very hard to restore the federal charitable deduction that would be available to all operating nonprofits. At the same time, in tandem with our counterparts in other states. So this is just one tool in our toolbox. And as folks start to think about how to maximize this opportunity, again, just let us know what questions you have and what challenges you're experiencing. And we'll be working in close coordination with Josh and his colleagues at the Alliance to help roll it out smoothly. But we do know there's going to be a learning process and it's going to take a minute. So it's a big new program, and we'll all just work together and try to be as patient as we can.
Yeah, 100%, Holly, that's super well said. I would just also say, if you have questions, reaching out to your community foundation, wherever it is that you are in our state, is probably the fastest, best way to decide how this is going to benefit your organization. And the Alliance, in working with Holly and Forefront, are going to use the community foundations as one of the tools to really provide that direct information, some consistency of information. So Sharon, I appreciate your comment. Marketing is key, 100%. It always is. And so we want to make sure that as we're learning, we're providing good education about what it is that we learn. But it's very exciting because, if this program is successful, it is creating across the entire state endowments worth at the maximum $100 million that are going to forever be supporting our not-for-profit sector. That's a very powerful statement to make, and we're thankful that the legislature has done this. And again, publicly, I'm incredibly thankful for Holly's effort in this. She and I have become BFFs through all of this, and her work was key in sort of getting this across the finish line for our state. So it's a great program, and we're really excited about it rolling out. So
Thank you, Josh.
Happy to continue to answer questions, and Holly, I know you're sending stuff out, but if anybody had something specific for me or the Alliance, like all the other speakers, I'm happy to get my email address in here, so you all can have that and reach out to me directly. If we wanted to, yeah, and this is really specifically for community foundations. So the portal for community foundations to become qualified for this starts on the 16th. We've made the membership of the Alliance aware of that. And so they have begun to sort of get what it is that they need, because just like it's the taxpayers, it's a process for community foundations. DOR, is using that structure because there are, if there's 50,000 nonprofits in the state, there's a much smaller number of community foundations. And so using that structure and the standards process that we have to go through to assure that we're making sure that these gifts are actually in qualified endowments has been really important. So those are the things that are going, that Holly has listed out there. But again, for the operating nonprofit, you might be much less interested in this, because this is stuff that community foundations are going to have to do to be the entity that you can use to build the endowment. And then the last slide is really this workforce development program. Again, as Holly said, that's going to start in 2026. But in essence, what that does is creates the opportunity for paying off someone's student debt to be able to take a job in a community that has certain, demographics, which is probably can be argued. It's a pretty broad ability as to where these programs are going to be put in place, but we'll be able to pay off someone's student debt and that be a tax-free event for them. It's very much sort of like in line with how a traditional scholarship works, where we're giving, $1,000 to a school. They're using that to really defer or deflect them taking on debt. It's paying tuition, right? Well, if a person wasn't able to get a scholarship, but now let's say has decided that they want to be a teacher or a nurse or work for a nonprofit organization. Again, the parameters of that are very broad. Thank you, Holly, for helping put that, structure it in such a way that it's structured so it impacts as many people as possible. We would be able, through a community foundation fund, pay off that person's student debt and that not count as income for them. Now, if we paid off their student debt, they would have to pay income tax on it. So the state is basically saying, hey, paying off debt is the same as avoiding debt. We think this is going to be a powerful tool to really help both donors and communities. One, just really get the professions that they need, the professionals that they need. I'm from Galesburg, Illinois, which is West Central, which does have population decline. And so if we can have this as a tool, as a mechanism to recruit people to live in our community and be teachers and be nurses, we're really excited about having another sort of arrow in the quiver for that. I would say for someone who has worked with individuals who want to create scholarships, this actually does what everyone thinks a scholarship will do. We talk to a family, they create a fund, they hope someone gets a scholarship and then comes back home and sort of honors the generosity of their community. That doesn't always happen. This actually honors generosity of a family, honors who a scholarship might have been created for, and actually isn't eligible to receive the gift until the person comes back and lives and works in a community. So this will definitely be in the 25 update for everything rolling out in 26. But this has also been something that we've been talking about. There is a companion legislation or sort of like complementary legislation at the federal level that has been discussed for a very long time. But the state of Illinois actually beat the federal government on this. And so hopefully we can now guilt the federal government into doing something similar. So
Thanks, Josh.
yeah.
We're going to have to move along just for the sake of time. Appreciate that. If folks have questions about the loan repayment program, we have more time to answer those. So, but feel free to send them our way and know that more information is coming. So this time we're going to hand it off to our friends from the governor's office. And Lori, I think you're up next. I apologize, we're running a little behind here, but hopefully we can still cover everything.
Yeah, we should be able to get through it, so. All right, so we're gonna talk about the federal uniform guidance. So, and as that connects to Illinois, as when GATA was introduced, the Grants Accountability and Transparency Act, it adopted that federal uniform guidance to CFR 200 as being the foundation of the rules for the state of Illinois. So every few years, feds take a look at the rules similar to the way what we do here in Illinois, and new guidance came out and it was effective October 1. And it follows the same format as the previous uniform guidance. So as far as the changes go, as far as the changes go, the majority of the guidance was a plain language rewrite. So they simplified language, tried to go to using more consistent terms throughout the document and such. So that is the bulk of the changes in that 10/1/2024 revision, which none of those rewrites changed any of the requirements under that guidance. The changes did, however, it increased the single audit threshold. It now allows for federal cognizant agencies for audit to provide audit extensions in very specific circumstances. It increased the de minimis rate, and it increased the threshold for equipment and supplies, and we'll talk more about that as well. There were other changes in addition. One of the items that we used in looking at the guidance and how to implement and what intent was of several sections and such was guidance that was provided by the Council on Federal Financial Assistance, COFA. So Courtney has put a link in the chat, and this is to the COFA guidance. And the Federal Agency Implementation Guide, that is very helpful information in explaining some of the little nuances that Courtney will talk about here with the de minimis rate and such. Slide. So when talking about plain language, and like I said, just using consistent terminology, now uniform guidance uses the term recipient and subrecipient rather than a non-federal entity in most places. There are areas to where they do still use the term non-federal entity, but for the most part, they're using recipient and subrecipient. This is, they wanted to use specific terms to reduce the ambiguity for those unfamiliar with the uniform guidance. So less reliance on definitions and using more straightforward terms. Okay. So the revisions, they follow the plain language principles. They grouped similar items together to try to more streamline the content so that you get more of the picture rather than having to look at various sections and piece them together. Which most of this is for the notice of funding opportunity. So they wanted to make sure that it followed the application process more closely than what it did previously. So in the guidance, it does spell out exactly what must be in those NOFOs, those notice of funding opportunities. And the revision just tried to make that clearer. You include the basic information at the top of a funding opportunity, so you can see the specifics more quickly to determine eligibility, rather than spending a lot of time digging all the way through the NOFO just to determine whether you're eligible to apply or not, trying to pull that forward so that organizations can determine quickly whether this is an opportunity that their organization would even be eligible for. Clearer definition of what must be included in a section versus what is at the agency's discretion. So most agencies, they did have substantial discretion in what they include in the NOFO as far as how much information. Now, the guidance more clearly says these are musts, not a determination that can be made. And it's also providing flexibility to agencies and giving applicants a common way to find information in every opportunity. So like I said, more of a streamlined notice of funding opportunity than what we'd seen previously. Okay. One of the bigger changes is the increase in the single audit threshold. So the single audit threshold, effective October 1, 2024, went from $750,000 to $1 million. This is effective for non-federal entities with a fiscal year beginning on or after 10/1/2024. So anyone who has a September 30 fiscal year end, you are now under that $1 million threshold for your audits in this current year that we're in right now. The intent, they want to reduce administrative burdens and provide more flexibility in programmatic and budgetary decisions for the grantees and the subrecipients in implementing these increases. So previously, the federal government, I guess many years ago, they allowed for extensions, and then they put in the policy that there would be no extensions for single audits. Now they're reversing that yet again, going back to giving the federal cognizant agencies for audit the authority to authorize extensions when the single audit submissions, when meeting that 9-month time frame would place undue burden on the auditee. Now, there is no definition of undue burden, so it is truly at the discretion of that federal agency to make that determination. That cognizant agency will also determine whether the extension will be granted and what the length of that extension will be. Now, for Illinois, we are working with this right now, establishing a process for how do we apply this guidance to our state audit requirements as well. And when it comes to our subrecipients that are subject to a single audit, those extensions will come to us because we're the pass-through entity. The federal agency would be providing the extension for the state if we made the request. However, we, as the pass-through entity, will be the ones to provide an extension for any of our grantees, regardless of what their funding source is from the state. So we're working through that right now. We're actually working to give a broad definition of undue burden so that agencies will have a little more guidance, and hopefully the intent is that they will be able to do that in a more uniform manner if we provide additional guidance with that. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go and start talking about the de minimis rate, then and indirect costs. And I am going to turn this over to Courtney for her to walk through these next few slides.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. So for the de minimis rate, the revisions effective October 1 increased the de minimis rate from 10% to an up to 15% of modified total direct costs. This allows recipients, subrecipients to apply the rate at their a lower rate at their discretion. But 15% de minimis would be the max percentage that would be able to be applied. This is effective for awards executed on or after October 1st, with some exceptions. For existing awards, basically awards that were executed before October 1, the funding source is going to drive the implementation of this increase of the de minimis rate. We have guidance that we provided earlier from the COFA that shows the implementation of the de minimis rate for federal awards that were effective prior to that date or executed prior to that date, and how that federal awarding agency is going to adopt the implementation of the de minimis. So if that federal agency has not applied the revisions to an existing award, we as the state for our subrecipients cannot apply those revisions to their subawards. So as a state, we are bound to what the federal awarding agency states for those federal funds. For state funds, we are having lots of conversations on how best to implement this and all the differing guidance from the federal agencies. So the state awarding agency is going to need to determine for state funds if there are sufficient funds to support that increase of the de minimis rate. That increase would have to be supported and documented via an amendment, and it would be effective from the date of the amendment was executed. Also may not be retroactively applied back to the beginning of the award if it was in effect prior to the October 1st date. Again, as per always, recipients, subrecipients are not required to use the de minimis rate. They can appropriately negotiate at whatever level they need to. On to the next slide, please. So the de minimis would be used by recipients or subrecipients that do not have a current negotiated rate. That would be negotiated at the state level, the state of Illinois, or a federally negotiated indirect cost rate. Our centralized indirect cost rate election system has been updated to reflect that increase of the de minimis rate to the up to 15%. This was done in October to align to reflect in the grantee portal for those grantees that as of 9/30, their rate was 10%, and as of 10/1, they have the option or ability to do the 15% as long as those programs and those awards it is applicable to based on the source of funding and whether or not that federal agency has applied it. We are having a lot of conversations with our state awarding agencies, working in a way to try and best adopt and implement this in a very uniform approach to the extent that we can. That's on the de minimis rate. And then the modified total, sorry, next slide, please. The other change would be that the modified total direct cost definition had a change for the subaward amount. It used to be up to the first 25% of each subaward was allowed in the calculation, and now it is up to the first 50,000. So that change has been made there, and then also for the exclusion updated to reflect that as well. The other change would be to the equipment and supplies threshold. Sorry, next slide. So they increased the thresholds for both of these from for the per unit acquisition cost to increase from 5,000 to 10,000. The items that are less than 10,000 would be categorized as supplies, and They also clarified the disposition requirements for unused supplies and provided a definition of unused supplies as well within the uniform guidance language. I think now it goes back to you, Lori. Thank you.
All right. One thing that I did want to address that I skimmed right over, so thank you, Holly, for the reminder in the chat regarding the GATA audit thresholds. So yes, the Attorney General threshold for nonprofits did increase to $500,000. We are working on an amendment to the GATA administrative rules right now. They are with the Secretary of State, so we are making progress on moving forward to address increasing the state GATA audit thresholds as well. So I don't want to spend a lot of time or get into details with that until those rules have at least went through the comment period and such. So there will be more changes to the GATA audit thresholds and the audit requirements to bring us more in line with other state audit requirements as well as the federal audit requirements. So administrative rules, that's where we're at right now. We're working on our administrative rules. Like I said, they are at the Secretary of State right now, so we are moving along. We will be revising the NOFO template and reassessing the merit review process to make sure that we stay in line with those federal requirements. We have revised the indirect cost rate election system and the ARMS, the Audit Report Review Management System, to incorporate these updates, and we'll continue to make updates as to we change other audit requirements, etc. We do have a learning management system for those that don't know it on our website under the training tab. We have 5 modules regarding grant making process, so the life cycle of the grant. So we have modules on the GATA foundations, which is just an overview of GATA high level. We have a pre-award course, a post-award course, an audit course, and an indirect cost rate course. So please go out and check it out. It is free to anyone and everyone, and we love the feedback. But we will be going through that, or we are going through that now to identify the changes that we need in our information based on these revisions. And we, as we do annually, updating that uniform grant agreement and the amendment templates for the agencies to have a unified process. So, next slide. And I think that is it. We appreciate being here. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out, omb.gata@illinois.gov. That will get your question to us and routed to the correct person, our correct subject matter expert that will be able to provide you the correct response. So any other questions or any questions at all? And I'll turn it back over to Holly.
Any questions for Gombe, GATU folks? I know some of you are here for this content, so just making sure you don't have more questions. On several of these issues, we expect rules to be going through JCAR in January and in the coming months. So if you have any questions about how to follow that process, you can reach out about that as well. And or if you need help submitting comments when they're invited for any of these issues, let us know how we can support you. So before we wrap up, I just want to quickly, I'll keep watching for questions, don't hesitate, but there's a few things I want to make sure folks are aware of before we wrap up. So first, going into the new year, today we covered laws that have already become law. And in January, we have an event to look forward and talk about what we're proactively working on in 2025 as we start both a new General Assembly at the state level and a new Congress at the federal level. So we want to give folks a snapshot of our legislative agenda at the federal and state levels. And so that's what we're going to do in January. And that will include another wonderful panel of folks that we partner with on each of these topical areas, and also some legislators that are chief sponsors of our state efforts. So I want to make sure folks take note of that. And I put the registration link in chat. So please join us if you're able after the new year. And also, so here's a few other events. I do want to flag this exciting one on January 10th, which is the first time that I'm aware of that we'll really take a look at how artificial intelligence is starting to show up in our work in the nonprofit sector. And we were invited to partner on this event by the ACLU. And there's a few other partners you'll recognize on that event. So it should be a really good discussion that's geared really towards folks that are working on public policy, so that we can start thinking about what questions to ask and kind of be on the lookout for areas of opportunity and concern related to AI. So that should be a really interesting discussion. I want to make sure folks know. And then unfortunately, I didn't catch my own mistake on the slide. Folks that might be interested in joining us for Foundations on the Hill, I want to flag that at the federal level, they had to change the dates. So the dates on the slide are incorrect, and I'll make sure I update that before we send it out. But they're actually going to be the last week of February due to a change in the congressional calendar. So if you're not familiar with Foundations on the Hill, I'd invite you to learn more and know that that's our kind of joint Hill Day nationally to talk about issues of importance to philanthropy in our state. So please join us when you're able. You can visit our event calendar, not just for policy events, but for all kinds of events that Forefront hosts. There's going to be other areas that might interest you if you check out our calendar. And lastly, be sure you're signed up for our Policy Action Center that's noted on this slide and previously in chat. It's really important that folks that need to follow our policy work are signed up for that. That's your best way to stay informed. So prior to everything getting really busy in January, federally and in Springfield, make sure you're signed up for that so you'll get our breaking news. And I just want to say again, thank you so much to our excellent panel and really appreciate your time and expertise. And at this point, I'll make a last call for questions on any topic, if anybody has anything they need to ask before we wrap up. Any questions? Panel, any final comments or things you want to go back to before we close? Well, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of the holiday season and get some rest. We're going to need your voices in 2025. There's a lot happening. So get refreshed and get ready. Julian, did you have anything you wanted to add? I saw you come on camera. Okay, well, it's nice to see your face.
Just to say thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.